The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Stephen's modest apartment, casting thin strips of light across the resignation letter he'd been staring at for the past hour. After 15 years at Goldman Sachs, his career had ended not with the bang he'd always feared, but with a whisper, a gentle suggestion that perhaps it was time to explore other opportunities. The corporate speak couldn't mask the reality: he'd been pushed out, replaced by younger analysts who could work longer hours for less pay. His phone buzzed again, another message from Daniel. His younger brother had been calling daily since hearing about the layoff, each time more insistent about his offer. "Come work with me," Daniel had said. "We're doing amazing things at TechFin Solutions. You'd be perfect for the CFO position." Stephen ran his fingers through his graying hair, feeling every one of his 48 years. The prospect of starting over terrified him, but Daniel's offer represented more than just a job. It was a chance to rebuild, to prove that his career wasn't over. With trembling fingers, he picked up his phone. "I've been thinking about your offer," Stephen said when Daniel answered. "Finally. Look, I'm heading into a meeting, but come by the office tomorrow at 9. I'll show you what we're building. You're going to love it, Steve. This is exactly what you need right now." The enthusiasm in Daniel's voice was contagious, but something in his brother's tone nagged at Stephen. It reminded him of their childhood, when Daniel would convince him to go along with some scheme that inevitably ended in trouble. Still, what choice did he have? His savings wouldn't last forever, and the job market wasn't kind to executives his age. The next morning, Stephen stood in front of TechFin Solutions' gleaming office building, adjusting his tie in the reflection of the glass doors. The company occupied 3 floors in downtown Boston's Innovation District, a far cry from the startup Daniel had described in his garage just 2 years ago. Daniel met him in the lobby, looking every bit the successful tech entrepreneur in his designer jeans and cashmere sweater. "Welcome to the future of finance," he said, spreading his arms wide. "We're revolutionizing how small businesses access capital. No more waiting months for bank approvals. Our AI-driven platform provides instant decisions, competitive rates, and none of the traditional bureaucracy." As Daniel led him through the office, Stephen noticed the energy of the young team, the sleek workstations, the wall of awards the company had already won. Everything screamed success, but years of financial experience had taught Stephen to look beneath the surface. "What's your burn rate?" Stephen asked during the tour. "And what's the current runway?" Daniel's smile flickered for just a moment. "We're in a great position. Just closed our Series B funding round. But let's talk about the details later. First, I want you to meet the team." Throughout the day, Stephen was introduced to dozens of employees, each more enthusiastic than the last about the company's mission. But whenever he tried to discuss specific numbers, Daniel would steer the conversation in another direction or be pulled away for an urgent matter. By late afternoon, sitting in Daniel's corner office with a view of the harbor, Stephen felt both exhilarated and uneasy. "The operation is impressive," he said carefully. "But I need to understand the financial picture before I can commit." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression turning serious. "Look, Steve, I know you're used to everything being by the books, perfectly balanced. But this is tech. It's different. We're growing fast, and sometimes the numbers look a little unconventional to traditional finance guys. Trust me, everything's under control." The words sent a chill down Stephen's spine, reminding him of their father's warnings about Daniel's tendency to cut corners. But when Daniel pushed the employment contract across the desk, Stephen found himself reaching for a pen. The salary was generous, the equity package even more so. More importantly, it was a lifeline when he was drowning. "Welcome aboard, big brother," Daniel said, clapping him on the shoulder. "We're going to do great things together." As Stephen signed his name, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was signing away more than just his professional future. The sun was setting over the harbor, casting long shadows across the office, and in those shadows, Stephen thought he saw the ghosts of all the decisions that had led him to this moment, and all the consequences yet to come. 3 months into his role as CFO, Stephen sat alone in his office well past midnight, his desk illuminated by the harsh glow of his computer screen. The quarterly financial review was due tomorrow, and the numbers weren't adding up. They hadn't been adding up for weeks, but he'd been trying to convince himself that he was just missing something, that his brother couldn't possibly be involved in what the documents suggested. His hands trembled as he pulled up another spreadsheet. The official books showed steady growth, impressive profit margins, and a healthy cash flow. But buried deep in the company's cloud storage, he discovered another set of books, ones that told a very different story. TechFin Solutions was hemorrhaging money, with customer acquisition costs far exceeding revenue. The AI platform Daniel had touted as revolutionary was burning through cash at an unsustainable rate. A soft knock at his door made him jump. "Still at it?" Daniel asked, leaning against the doorframe. In the dim light, his brother looked older, the weight of secrets evident in the lines around his eyes. "Just trying to make sense of some discrepancies," Stephen replied carefully, watching his brother's reaction. "The numbers in the investor presentations don't match our internal records." Daniel closed the door behind him and sank into the chair across from Stephen's desk. "You've always been thorough," he said, his voice carrying a note of resignation. "It's what I admired about you growing up. Remember when Dad would give us our allowance, and you'd always insist on counting it twice? Don't do this, Daniel. Don't try to deflect with childhood memories. What's going on with these books?" The brothers stared at each other across the desk, decades of shared history hanging between them. Finally, Daniel leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The tech industry runs on optimism, Steve. Everyone inflates their numbers a little. It's how you attract investors, how you keep the dream alive until the reality catches up. This isn't inflation, it's fraud," Stephen said, his voice cracking. "You're showing investors one set of numbers while keeping the real books hidden. Do you understand what that means? We're not talking about bending the rules, this is criminal. You think I don't know that?" Daniel's composure cracked, revealing a glimpse of desperation beneath. "I started this company with everything I had. I mortgaged my house, maxed out my credit cards. I have 300 employees counting on me. If we don't maintain investor confidence until the next funding round, it all collapses." Stephen felt the weight of those 300 families pressing down on his shoulders. "How bad is it really? We're 6 months from insolvency unless we secure the Series C funding. But we have promising leads. A major venture capital firm is interested. Once we close that round, we can straighten everything out. I just need you to trust me, like you did when we were kids." The mention of trust sparked something in Stephen's memory, their father's voice on his deathbed, making Stephen promise to look after his younger brother. But was protecting Daniel the same as enabling him? "I need time to think," Stephen said finally. "This isn't something I can just ignore." Daniel stood, his expression hardening. "You're my brother, Steve. Family protects family. I brought you in when no one else would touch you. Remember that before you do anything rash." After Daniel left, Stephen sat in the darkness, the gravity of his situation crushing him. The documentation of fraud sat on his computer like a loaded gun. If he reported it, he would destroy his brother's life and the livelihoods of hundreds of employees. If he stayed silent, he would be complicit in a crime that could land them both in federal prison. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out the photo he kept there, him and Daniel as children, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera without a care in the world. When had things become so complicated? When had the line between right and wrong become so blurred? His phone buzzed with a text from Daniel, "I'm counting on you, big brother. We'll get through this together." Stephen placed the photo face down on his desk and began methodically downloading files to an encrypted drive. Whatever decision he made, he needed evidence. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was gathering ammunition for a war he never wanted to fight, a war that would leave no survivors, only victims of their own choices. The autumn rain tapped against Stephen's bedroom window as he lay awake, watching shadows dance across the ceiling. Sleep had become a distant memory since discovering Daniel's deception. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw spreadsheets filled with falsified numbers, heard the voices of investors being led astray, felt the weight of his own complicity growing heavier with each passing day. He thought of their mother, how she'd always said that the truth was a gift you gave yourself. What would she think of them now? Her two sons, trapped in a web of lies that grew more tangled with each passing day. The morning would bring another board meeting, another performance where he'd have to stand beside Daniel and present numbers he knew were false. His phone illuminated the darkness, a message from James Chen, his old friend from law school. They were meeting for lunch tomorrow, a meeting Stephen had arranged with trembling hands and a racing heart. James specialized in whistleblower cases. He would know what to do, how to navigate this moral maze without destroying everything and everyone in its path. The next day, sitting in a quiet corner of a restaurant far from TechFin's offices, Stephen watched James's expression darken as he outlined the situation. He kept his voice low, though the words felt like screams in his throat. The real numbers show they're 3 months away from complete collapse, Stephen explained, pushing his untouched sandwich aside. Daniel's been using new investor money to pay off earlier investors, creating the illusion of profitability. It's basically a tech-enabled Ponzi scheme. James leaned back, his legal pad filled with notes. You understand that as CFO, you have a fiduciary responsibility. Staying silent makes you complicit. He's my brother, James. Stephen's voice cracked. When our father died, I promised to protect him. But I never imagined. I keep thinking about the day he called to offer me this job. I was so grateful, so relieved. Now I wonder if he hired me because he trusted me, or because he thought family loyalty would keep me quiet. Sometimes protecting someone means stopping them before they destroy themselves completely, James said gently. The longer this goes on, the worse the consequences will be, for Daniel, for the investors, for everyone involved. Stephen stared into his coffee, seeing his reflection fragmented in the dark liquid. There's a secretary in accounting, Margaret. She's been there since the beginning. Yesterday, she showed me a photo of her grandchildren. She's investing half her salary in company stock because she believes in Daniel's vision. How do I tell people like her that it's all built on lies? You don't have to do this alone, James assured him. There are proper channels, ways to minimize the collateral damage. But Stephen, you need to decide soon. Every day that passes puts more people at risk. That evening, Stephen sat in his parked car outside Daniel's house, watching through the window as his brother played with his young daughters. Daniel was teaching the girls how to dance, all 3 of them laughing as they twirled around the living room. The scene stirred memories of their own childhood, Daniel following him everywhere, looking up to him with absolute trust and admiration. His phone buzzed. A message from James, whatever you decide, I'm here. But remember, doing the right thing and doing the easy thing are rarely the same. Stephen thought about Margaret and her grandchildren, about Daniel's daughters dancing in the living room, about all the employees who had bet their futures on TechFin. The weight of their lives pressed against his chest until he could barely breathe. He started the car and drove to his apartment, where he spent the night meticulously documenting everything he had discovered. Each spreadsheet, each fraudulent report, each misleading presentation became another piece of evidence. As he worked, he remembered something their father used to say, a man's character isn't measured by his intentions, but by his actions when faced with difficult choices. Dawn was breaking when he finally finished. The encrypted drive sat on his desk like a bomb waiting to detonate. In a few hours, he would have to face Daniel across the conference room table, look into his brother's eyes, and pretend he wasn't holding the power to destroy everything they had built together. The morning sun painted his office walls gold as he sat, watching the city wake up, trying to find the strength to either bury the truth or let it free, knowing that either choice would leave scars that might never heal. The boardroom felt smaller than usual that morning, its walls seeming to close in as Stephen watched his brother charm the investors. Daniel moved through his presentation with practiced ease, each slide telling a story of innovation and growth. But now Stephen saw the performance for what it was, a carefully choreographed dance of deception. Our AI lending algorithm has achieved a 98% accuracy rate, Daniel announced, his voice carrying the perfect blend of confidence and humility. We're not just disrupting the market, we're redefining it. Stephen felt the weight of the encrypted drive in his pocket, heavy as a stone. He had arrived early that morning to find his access to the financial servers revoked. A warning shot from Daniel, delivered with brotherly subtlety. As the meeting concluded, Stephen noticed Margaret lingering by the door, her usually warm smile replaced by worry lines. "Mr. Stevens," she said softly, "I've been reviewing the quarterly reports, and there are some irregularities I'd like to discuss." Before Stephen could respond, Daniel appeared between them, his hand falling firmly on Margaret's shoulder. "Margaret, would you mind grabbing the updated projections from my office? Stephen and I need to have a quick chat." They watched her leave, her hesitation visible in every step. As soon as the door closed, Daniel's smile vanished. "You've been talking to people, haven't you?" His voice was low, dangerous. "Asking questions, stirring up concerns. The employees deserve to know the truth, Daniel. Their futures are at stake." "Their futures?" Daniel's laugh was bitter. "I'm protecting their futures. Do you think they'll thank you when the company collapses? When they're all unemployed? When my daughters have to leave their school because daddy can't afford tuition anymore?" Stephen felt the familiar twist of guilt in his stomach. "This isn't about your daughters. It's about doing what's right." "Right?" Daniel stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Was it right when you stood by and watched Goldman Sachs push you out? When you came crawling to your little brother for help? I gave you everything, a job, a purpose, a chance to rebuild your life. And this is how you repay me." The words hit their mark with surgical precision. Stephen struggled to maintain his composure, remembering James's advice about staying calm, documenting everything. "I'm trying to help you, Daniel. If we come clean now, work with the authorities. I've already spoken to the board," Daniel cut him off. "As of this morning, you're on administrative leave pending an investigation into potential misconduct. We've found some concerning transactions from your time at Goldman Sachs that the board needs to review." The blood drained from Stephen's face. "You're framing me." "I'm protecting my company," Daniel replied, his expression unreadable. "Security will escort you out. Don't try to access any company files, that would be a criminal offense." As if on cue, 2 security guards appeared at the door. Stephen looked at his brother, searching for any trace of the boy who used to follow him around with hero worship in his eyes. Instead, he saw a stranger wearing his brother's face. That evening, Stephen sat in his apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of his life. His phone buzzed with messages from concerned colleagues, but the one that caught his eye was from Margaret. "They're asking me to sign off on new financial statements. I don't know what to do." His hands shook as he typed his response, "Don't sign anything. Save everything. I'll find a way to make this right." Later, unable to sleep, Stephen found himself looking at old family photos. There was Daniel at his college graduation, beaming with pride as Stephen straightened his tie. Another showed them at their father's funeral, holding each other up through their grief. When had everything gone so wrong? When had preservation of wealth become more important than preservation of truth? The sound of breaking glass startled him. Someone had thrown a rock through his living room window, wrapped in a note, "Keep your mouth shut. Family protects family." Stephen picked up the rock, feeling its weight. It wasn't just a threat, it was a reminder of everything he stood to lose. But as he looked at the shattered glass reflecting the city lights, he realized something: sometimes protecting family meant saving them from themselves, no matter the cost. His phone lit up with another message, this time from James: "The SEC is interested in your case. We need to move quickly." Stephen stared at the message for a long time, thinking about Margaret, about Daniel's daughters, about all the lives tangled in this web of lies. The path forward was clear now, but that didn't make it any easier to take the first step. The early morning light filtered through the broken window of Stephen's apartment, casting fractured shadows across the files spread before him. Each document represented a piece of the truth he had gathered, but more importantly, they represented the stories of real people: Margaret's grandchildren's college fund, the retirement savings of longtime employees, the dreams of small business owners who had trusted TechFin with their futures. His hands trembled as he poured another cup of coffee, his third since midnight. The past week had been a blur of whispered conversations and clandestine meetings. Margaret had been quietly gathering evidence from within the company, risking her own position to document the fraud. Other employees had started coming forward, sharing their suspicions, their fears, their stories. "I've worked here since we were just 10 people in a garage," Tom from engineering had told him, voice quavering. "I believed in Daniel's vision. I convinced my sister to invest her savings. How do I tell her it was all a lie?" The weight of their trust pressed against Stephen's chest, making it hard to breathe. He thought of Daniel's daughters, how they looked at their father with the same admiration he once had. The same admiration that had blinded him to the truth for so long. His phone buzzed, a text from his neighbor: "Black SUV parked outside again. Same guys as yesterday." Stephen moved to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. Daniel's surveillance was becoming more obvious, a sign of growing desperation. The company's cash reserves were dwindling faster than expected, and rumors had started circulating about delayed payments to vendors. A gentle knock at his door made him freeze. Through the peephole, he saw Margaret, clutching her purse like a shield. "I couldn't sleep," she said as he let her in, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "They're asking me to backdate documents now. Daniel said it's just temporary, just until the new funding comes through." "But I saw the real numbers, Stephen. There is no funding coming." Stephen guided her to the couch, noting how her hands shook as she pulled documents from her purse. "I've been with the company since the beginning," she continued. "I watched those girls grow up. I baked cookies for their birthdays. How did we end up here?" The question hung in the air, heavy with shared grief. Stephen thought about all the moments that had led to this, the small compromises, the ignored warning signs, the comfortable lies they had all told themselves. His phone lit up with a message from James: "SEC meeting confirmed for tomorrow. Are you ready?" Margaret noticed his expression. "You're going to do it, aren't you? You're going to tell the truth." "Not just me," Stephen replied softly. "We all have to decide what we stand for. What we're willing to live with." She nodded, pulling out a USB drive from her purse. "I made copies of everything. Email trails, altered documents, board presentations. I keep thinking about my grandchildren, how I always tell them that honesty matters more than anything." As they worked through the night, organizing evidence and preparing statements, Stephen felt a strange sense of peace settling over him. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since discovering the fraud, he felt like he was truly protecting his brother, not by hiding his crimes, but by preventing him from causing more harm. Dawn was breaking when Margaret finally left. Standing in his doorway, she turned back with tears in her eyes. "Your father would be proud of you, Stephen. Sometimes love means being strong enough to stop someone from destroying themselves." The words echoed in his mind as he prepared for the SEC meeting. On his desk, the photo of him and Daniel as children caught the morning light. They looked so innocent, so unaware of the choices that lay ahead. Stephen gently placed the photo face down, a symbolic gesture of choosing truth over comfortable illusions. His phone buzzed one last time. "Daniel, whatever you're planning, remember who you are." Remember your family. Stephen thought of Margaret's grandchildren, of Daniel's daughters, of all the families whose futures hung in the balance. He did remember who he was, not just Daniel's brother, but someone who had the power to end this cycle of deception before it destroyed more lives. The sun rose fully over the city as Stephen gathered his evidence. In a few hours, he would tell the truth that would change everything. It wasn't just about exposing fraud anymore, it was about showing that real courage meant facing the consequences of your actions, no matter how painful they might be. The courtroom fell silent as Daniel was led away in handcuffs, his designer suit replaced by prison orange. Stephen watched his brother's shoulders slump, seeing not the disgraced CEO, but the little boy who used to crawl into his bed during thunderstorms. The verdict, guilty on all counts of securities fraud, echoed through the chamber like a final note in a symphony of deception. Outside, autumn leaves danced across the courthouse steps as reporters clamored for statements. Stephen stood beside Margaret, her presence steady and grounding. The past 6 months had transformed them all, the SEC investigation, the media circus, the painful process of untangling years of financial fraud. But beneath the headlines about corporate malfeasance lay a more intimate story of family, loyalty, and the quiet courage it takes to choose truth over blood. Uncle Stephen. The voice cut through the crowd like a shaft of sunlight. Daniel's daughters, accompanied by their mother Sarah, pushed through the reporters. The older girl, Emma, wrapped her arms around his waist while her younger sister, Lucy, clung to her mother's hand, uncertainty written across her small face. "We missed you," Emma whispered against his coat. The words pierced Stephen's heart. He hadn't seen them since the investigation began, respecting Sarah's need for distance as their world unraveled. Sarah's eyes met his, tired but clear. "The girls need their uncle," she said softly. "Whatever happened between you and Daniel, they need to know that family can mean more than just keeping secrets." That evening, Stephen sat with his nieces at their favorite ice cream parlor, watching them navigate this new reality with the resilience only children possess. Emma talked about her science project, Lucy showed him her loose tooth, both of them carefully avoiding mention of their father's sentencing. "Daddy says you betrayed him," Emma said finally, her spoon pushing melting ice cream around the bowl. "But Mom says sometimes the bravest thing is telling the truth, even when it hurts." Stephen felt tears prick at his eyes. "Your dad made some mistakes," he explained gently. "Sometimes when people we love do wrong things, helping them face the consequences is the truest form of love." Later that night, Stephen visited the office building that had once housed Techfin Solutions. The company had been restructured, its legitimate assets salvaged by new management. Margaret had been instrumental in the transition, her deep knowledge of the company's operations proving invaluable. She joined him now, looking up at the darkened windows. "The new company approved the employee stock compensation package," she reported. "Most people will recover their investments. It's not everything, but it's something." "How are the teams doing?" "Healing," she replied thoughtfully. "Some left, some stayed. Tom's sister got her savings back. He cried when he told her. Said it felt like putting something right in the world." Stephen nodded, remembering the weight that had lifted when he finally spoke the truth to the SEC. The investigation had been brutal, exposing not just financial fraud but the complex web of relationships and loyalties that had enabled it. Yet from those ashes, something new had emerged, a chance for redemption, not just for the company but for all of them. His phone buzzed, a message from Sarah with a photo of the girls doing their homework. Below it, she'd written, "They're proud of their uncle. So am I." 2 weeks later, Stephen stood before a room of business students at his alma mater. The dean had invited him to speak about corporate ethics, though Stephen knew the real draw was the scandal that had made headlines. "Financial fraud isn't just about numbers," he told them, his voice steady. "It's about trust. About the lives behind those numbers, the employees who believe in you, the families who depend on you, the communities you serve. Sometimes the hardest choices we face aren't between right and wrong, but between different kinds of right, different kinds of love. He thought of Daniel, now serving his sentence, of their weekly phone calls that started awkward but grew more honest with time. Of Sarah bringing the girls to visit, of family dinners where healing happened in small moments, in past plates and shared stories. In his new office, overlooking a different part of the city, Stephen kept 2 photos on his desk. One showed him and Daniel as children, a reminder of the past they shared. The other was newer, him with Emma and Lucy at a recent ballet recital, their faces bright with joy despite everything. Between them sat the truth he had finally learned, that love sometimes means walking through fire, that family is not about protecting secrets but about protecting each other's souls, and that the greatest act of brotherhood can be helping someone face the consequences of their choices. As sunset painted the sky in shades of redemption, Stephen opened his laptop to begin work on his new project, a startup focused on financial transparency and ethical investing. The company's mission statement, framed on the wall, read simply, "Truth is the foundation of trust. Trust is the foundation of everything else." He thought of Margaret's grandchildren, of Daniel's daughters, of all the lives touched by the choices they had made. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in years, it felt true. And in that truth, there was peace.